House is equal in value, equal in worth, and equal in dignity, and that can never be robbed from them. What this government is trying to do, however, is somehow say that adding extra money and adding a new placard, though not changing the role, is somehow making the minister equal in voice at the table. That's just not the case.
Wow. Statements by members. Déclaration de député. The honourable member for Brampton North.
Mr. Speaker, over the last 2 years, I've had the privilege of visiting many schools in my riding of Brampton North, and I always find that it is our teachers that are the unsung heroes that help our students transition through life's challenging times. Leo Abraham was a grade 4 and 5 teacher at St. John Bosco School, and an inspiration and mentor to all those that knew him. It is with great sadness that I must announce that Leo passed away last Thursday after a head-on crash with a tractor trailer while driving home from a Toronto FC playoff game. Leo's lighthearted sense of humor and non-judgmental nature created an environment that made everyone feel at ease and accepted in his presence. These unique qualities helped him connect with and mentor countless young students during his nearly 18 years as a teacher. My thoughts and prayers are with his family, his wife Sonia, his sons Owen, Ian, Sebastian, and Ethan. They and all the countless lives that he has touched will forever miss Leo.
The honourable member for Thornhill.
Mr. Speaker, 4 years ago this week, the world lost a human rights hero. Nelson Mandela's legacy, the inspiration he sparked globally in those who similarly stand in opposition to political injustice and tyranny. That's why the Raoul Wallenberg All-Party Parliamentary Caucus for Human Rights was moved to convene in this building today a gathering of families of political prisoners. Their names: Raif Badawi, imprisoned in Saudi Arabia, family in Sherbrooke; Dr. Wang Binjiang, imprisoned in China, family in Montreal; Qian Sun, a Canadian Falun Gong practitioner, imprisoned in China; Leopoldo Lopez, imprisoned in Venezuela, family originally from Fredericton; Saeed Malikpour, imprisoned in Iran, sister in Vancouver; and Ayatollah Boroujerdi, a champion of religious tolerance, imprisoned in Iran. Mr. Speaker, each a human rights role model. We stand today in witness to their heroism and unjust imprisonment and call for their release.
The honourable member for Winnipeg South.
Mr. Speaker, this week in our nation's capital, the Olympic curling trials are underway. Known as the Roar of the Rings, 18 of the best teams in the country will compete to represent Canada at the 2018 Winter Olympics in Pyeongchang, South Korea. Curling has always been important to me and my family, Mr. Speaker. My father, Don Duguid, is a 3-time Canadian Brier champion, 2-time world champion, and long-time curling broadcaster. He was inducted into the Curling Hall of Fame in 1974 and the World Curling Hall of Fame in 2013. Manitoba boasts some of the best curlers in the country and the world, Mr. Speaker, and I particularly want to wish the best of luck to teams from Manitoba competing in this week's trials. Regardless of who emerges victorious on Sunday, Mr. Speaker, I am sure that our country will be well represented at the Olympics. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and hurry hard!
The honourable member for Trois-Rivières. Mr. Speaker, just yesterday I attended a citizenship ceremony where 75 immigrants from all over the world became full-fledged Canadian citizens, whether they are among the 60% who make up economic immigrants, the 30% of immigrants in the family reunification class, or the 10% made up of refugees. What these new citizens have in common is perseverance. We know that the path to Canadian citizenship is strewn with challenges, yet there are organizations and individuals whose mission it is to make this transition easier. And that is why I want to highlight the remarkable work of the Welcome Centre for Newcomers, the Service d'accueil aux nouveaux arrivants in Trois-Rivières. At SANA, staff and volunteers have been working tirelessly for nearly 50 years to provide a welcoming face and support to newcomers. Mr. Speaker, please, with your permission, I would like to thank each and every one of these individuals from the bottom of my heart. And to you, my new fellow citizens, again, welcome, and may you be happy in your new home.
Honourable member for Avalon.
Mr. Speaker, today I rise to recognise Chief Warrant Officer John Heffernan from my hometown of Conception Bay South. Last month, John was honoured by the Governor-General with the Order of Military Merit. John began his community involvement at the age of 8 as he joined the CLB, where he reached the rank of Sergeant Major. Joining the primary reserves in the late 1980s would just be the start of John's military career. First as a mobile support equipment operator, up to present day, where he serves as Regimental Sergeant Major to the 37th Service Battalion, which operates out of Newfoundland and New Brunswick. He continues his incredible community service to his community as Fire Chief in Conception Bay South, a job he does with great pride and passion. The exemplary work that John does as an ambassador for wounded warriors, aiding members of his military community, is just one more way that CWO John Heffernan embodies the spirit of the Order of Military Merit. I invite all my colleagues to join me in congratulating CWO John Heffernan on this prestigious honour and thank him for his service to our country and to his community.
Bravo. Bravo.
The Honourable Member for Mégantic-L'Érable. Mr. Speaker, the Thetford region is changing. From a single industry town based on asbestos mining, it has become the perfect example of economic diversification. Today in Ottawa, I'm meeting with an important witness to this transformation. Nelson Fecteau covered news in our riding for approximately 40 years for the daily newspaper La Tribune. We've often seen him on community television and heard him on radio. You know, Nelson knows everything. He knows everyone. And he's been able to go through his whole career without alienating a single political party. That says a lot, Mr. Speaker. But Nelson isn't retiring. Today he's sharing the Thetford Secrets of Success in his first book, 36 Successful Entrepreneurs. You know, economic diversification doesn't just happen on its own. There are men and women who rolled up their shirt sleeves and built businesses, created jobs, and succeeded under difficult circumstances. That is the region of Thetford. Challenges are huge, and the environmental burden after 100 years of asbestos mining is a very heavy one to bear. But the stories that Nelson tells us in his book shows us how strong these entrepreneurs are. Anything's possible when you put in the time and the energy, and when you want to succeed. Thank you, Nelson.
The Honourable Member for Fleetwood Port Kells.
Mr. Speaker, as we enter the Christmas season, the time many call the season of giving, I wanted to salute and celebrate the many organizations in Surrey who give to the community all year long. For individuals or families in distress with long-term challenges or short-term difficulties, these organizations, powered by so many volunteers and donors, offer a beacon of hope, from food banks to shelters from the weather or the storms of life. They offer a pathway to a better life in a new country for the many newcomers who settle in Surrey. They open their doors to people of their faith and to those who would otherwise lose faith. So let's all give them something back, a donation perhaps, or some of our time over the Christmas season. And maybe we can start here, Mr. Speaker, by standing and applauding those folks we all know back home who give and enrich our communities all year long.
Hear, hear.
The Honourable Member for Coquitlam, Port Coquitlam.
Mr. Speaker, in May, the Good Samaritan Drug Overdose Act received royal assent. This law is a humanitarian approach to dealing with drug problems, a law that saves lives. Neighbors or friends can now safely call police if they suspect someone is suffering a drug overdose. As the Health Minister said, protecting lives as Canadians is our most important priority.
We must continue to send this message to all Canadians.
Today, the Canadian HIV/AIDS Legal Network, the Law Foundation of Ontario, and the Waterloo Region Crime Prevention Council are releasing a wallet card and a fact sheet to help spread this important information. Le travail qu'ils font.
Their work will help in the fight to save lives. Thank you. The Honourable Member for Bellechasse, Les Etchemins, Lévis. Mr. Speaker, protection, safety, commitment, that is the policy that the Minister of Defence brought in last June. And under that policy, the Canadian Royal Navy must have at least 2 joint supply ships in order to be able to protect our 3 oceans. And yet, no ships can fill that important function. Canada, therefore, is vulnerable. Our Conservative government ordered the Asterix, which is soon to be completed, but Canada still urgently requires other ships. It is time that our minister put his money where his work is. The Davie shipyard is ready. They've built the first ship, Asterix, and the Liberals should be giving the contract to Obélisque, granting it before the holidays. The providers are ready. Our security depends on it. Let Davie help Canada.
The honourable member for Mississauga, Erin Mills.
Mr. Speaker, last week, fellow Liberal MPs of the Muslim and Jewish faith sat down to break bread and barriers over a joyful Christmas dinner. We took the goodwill that we collected between each other that evening and we paid it forward to a shelter for abused women this morning, bearing gifts and good wishes. Only in Canada, Mr. Speaker, only in Canada do voices of reason and collaboration paramount to remind the world that here we are one, regardless of race, religion, sexual orientation, and more. We are all Canadians. Our actions matter, Mr. Speaker, and I urge Canadians on this holiday season to share the love and goodwill in their communities, to reaffirm a strong, diverse, and inclusive Canada that everyone can call home. On behalf of my riding of Mississauga, Erin Mills, I wish everyone a joyous holiday season, a very Merry Christmas, and a Happy New Year.
Bravo! The honourable member for Brampton Centre.
It is the time of the year again. On behalf of my constituents, family and staff, I would like to take the opportunity to wish everyone a Merry Christmas. Thank you. It is the season where the power of sharing and loving seems to be in abundance within everyone. The great entertainer, Mr. Bob Hope, summed it up well. My idea of Christmas, whether old-fashioned or modern, it is simple. Loving others. Come off thinking of it, well, why do we wait for Christmas? Let's do it ourselves. Let's make every day be like Christmas. And I promise you that in 2018, the lights will continue to glow every day. I wish you a happy, prosperous New Year again. Have yourself a Merry, Merry Christmas. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Singing here, sir. The honourable member for Lanark, Frontenac, Kingston.
Mr. Speaker, violence and bigotry against religious believers has no place in any society, but even Canada is not immune. On January 29th of this year, 6 Muslims were murdered and 19 more were injured while praying at Quebec City's Islamic Cultural Centre. In 2004, Montreal's United Talmud Torah School was firebombed. In 2001, a mosque and a Hindu temple in Hamilton were firebombed by attackers who mistook both targets for Islamic institutions. And more than 30 years ago, in 1985, the worst mass murder in Canadian history specifically targeted Hindus. 329 people were killed in the bombing of Air India Flight 182. Canadians rightly condemn this violence and mourn the victims. That is why I am asking all members to support my motion, M153, to declare January 29th Canada's Day, National Day of Solidarity with victims, whatever their faith, of anti-religious bigotry and violence.
The honourable member for Malpeque.
Mr. Speaker, last May I was a guest at a Partnership for Peace conference in Budapest, Hungary, where I presented the Canadian perspective on intelligence reform and best practices. A specific focus was given to areas of improvement and the need to integrate common understood ethics with intelligence practices. The conference was sponsored by the Partnership for Peace Consortium of Defence Academies and Security Studies Institutes. Canada is an active member of this organization. The consortium promotes multinational collaboration on security and defence reform. Canada's membership in such multinational organizations helps shape future global security decision-making and promotes Canadian interests and values. Mr. Speaker, may this House recognize the Partnership for Peace Consortium's contribution in promoting stability, security, and democracy.
The honourable member for Laurier-Sainte-Marie. Mr. Speaker, it is with some sadness, but also with much hope, that I rise today to highlight the work of Ms. Ensaf Haidar, human rights advocate and spouse of the blogger Raif Badawi. I salute her perseverance and her courage, and I stand with her in full support. Raif Badawi was tortured and has been imprisoned simply because he dared to voice his opinions. His story, and that of his family living in Sherbrooke, is heartbreaking. In our society, one cannot remain silent on this injustice. This is not the first time I have risen in this House to call for the release of Mr. Badawi, but each and every time I hope it will be the last. And above all, I hope that our Prime Minister will finally stand up and demand his release. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member for Moose Jaw, Lake Centre, Lanigan.
Mr. Speaker, today Saskatchewan says goodbye to one of the most popular and admired politicians in history, Premier Brad Wall. Hailing from the Swift Current, Brad championed the Saskatchewan Party to 3 consecutive majority governments, including the 3rd largest majority in history back in 2011. He will be remembered for many things, perhaps most of all, heralding the province through a decade of unprecedented growth. Under Brad's leadership, Saskatchewan's population grew by over 160,000 people, finally breaking the elusive 1 million person mark back in 2012. During that same time, over 67,000 full-time jobs were created. And Mr. Speaker, during that time, Saskatchewan became a place where people went to rather than came from. Mr. Speaker, on behalf of all of my colleagues in this place, and most particularly on behalf of all of us from Saskatchewan, I say to Brad Wall, thank you, Brad. You will be missed.
Honourable Member for Humber River, Black Creek.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise in the House today to recognize the legacy and the passing of Nelson Mandela, a heroic moral model whose release from political imprisonment and subsequent transformative effort on South Africa as a whole demonstrates the moral imperative and compelling nature of pursuing justice for political prisoners. Mr. Speaker, unfortunately, Nelson Mandela is not the only political prisoner of the past, present, or the future. Today, at a press conference held on Parliament Hill, I personally heard the stories of 6 other political prisoners being held captive around the world today. Mr. Speaker, by recognizing the passing of Mr. Mandela, we create awareness of other political prisoners that embody the Mandela ethics and individuals who are heroic role models in their own right. We all must work together to put an end to these types of injustices. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions orales, oral questions. The Honourable Member for Milton.
Liberals have committed to implementing new taxes that promise to have a significant impact on the operations of small businesses in Canada. Now, these changes are expected to take effect in less than a month. The problem is, Mr. Speaker, there are still no details. We know that small businesses are the backbone of the country. They deserve our respect. They deserve a plan. Mr. Speaker, will the Minister of Finance in this government please indicate when will they be introducing the changes in specificity?
Honourable Minister of Fisheries.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank my colleague for the question. We share her view in terms of the importance of small and medium-sized businesses to the Canadian economy. That's why we're fulfilling an important commitment we made to Canadians by lowering small business taxes from 11% in 2015 to 9% by 2019. And with respect to the specific measures I assume she's referring to around income sprinkling, my colleague, the Minister of Finance, said they would take effect on January 1st, and all of the details will be known, obviously, before that point.
The Honourable Member for Milton. Order.
Mr. Speaker, just because it's my first opportunity to address the member directly, I wanted to say that we know full well on this side of the House how much a fighter he is. We want to wish him but I'm still going to make him answer tough questions. Now, Minister Speaker, the Minister of Finance announced these changes this summer, and he really thought that Canadians would notice. Unfortunately, what they encountered was vast protests and huge opposition. But they're still pressing ahead with this tax increase on January 1st, as the minister said. But today it was reported that the Liberals have spent more than $2.2 million on talent fees. This kind of overspending is exactly why they have to raise taxes on small businesses. Is the Minister of Finance really raising small business taxes so that he can pay the $2 million bill for actors they hired to promote their government?
Honourable President of the Treasury Board.
Speaker, these are part of broader agreements for government advertising, but it is notable that our government has actually reduced government advertising over the Conservative government of which she was a member. In fact, that government spent, during its tenure, almost $1 billion on quasi-partisan government advertising. Not only have we reduced government advertising costs, but we have also changed the rules to make sure that no government abuses government advertising to promote political interests.
Member for Milton.
Well, Mr. Speaker, not only they have reduced advertising, they seem to have reduced comments period as well on small business tax changes. Now, yesterday I was in New Brunswick, and I talked to local businesses in Mactaquac and Florenceville and in Woodstock, and you know what they wanted me to ask? They wanted this House to know that they usually plan their business strategy a year in advance. Yeah. And now they're faced with 25 days before the incoming of incredibly difficult and complex tax changes. Mr. Speaker, a lot of them are already struggling this year as it is, and now they have this to worry about over the Christmas holidays. Will they provide the details today so that small businesses have a chance to plan?
Honourable Minister of Fisheries.
So, Mr. Speaker, I want to thank my colleague for her generous comments a minute ago. I was glad she visited the Tobique-Mactaquac part of my province of New Brunswick. They're very fortunate to have an outstanding member of Parliament who himself was a small business owner from that community and who has spoken to our government repeatedly about the importance of those small businesses in Tobique-Mactaquac. And he was one of the loudest voices, Mr. Speaker, encouraging our government to act quickly on the campaign commitment we made to lower the small business taxes for those businesses she met in Tobique-Mactaquac, and I'm sure she'll celebrate with us that good news.
The Honourable Member for Richmond-Arthabasca. Mr. Speaker, politicians have a duty to be transparent and honest. And here we have a government, a Liberal government, which is opaque, and a Minister of Finance who is buried in conflicts of interest. A minister who organised consultations in the middle of summer while people were on holiday. A minister who refuses to provide more information on a reform which will have a catastrophic impact on our economy. Is there someone in this government who will finally show a minimum of respect for our entrepreneurs and our job creators?
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank my colleague, and I think colleagues might find it strange that someone in the Conservative government is talking about the importance of transparency. It's rather novel for us. Nevertheless, Mr. Speaker, I will say that he was talking about people being on holiday, sitting around a pool, but we have small business owners in Canada who participated in our consultations, and this is why we have made changes that we will have come into effect in January. The Honourable Member for Richmond-Arthabasca. I'm rather surprised, Mr. Speaker, to hear the Minister talk about transparency while he is bringing in time allocation. Mr. Speaker, what we're dealing with now, and we're seeing this everywhere in Canada, we're seeing problems because this tax reform is going to change the regime. This is in a few days, on January 1st, and people don't have any information about what's going to happen in 2018. Is there anyone on this Liberal ship? Is there a captain on the ship? The Honourable Minister of Fisheries. Mr. Speaker, I'm the captain today, and it's my pleasure to tell you that the details, well, you were Minister of Fisheries yourself, Mr. Speaker, so you know about the Coast Guard and all things about fisheries. But you'll agree with me that small business owners and entrepreneurs know very well that we're going to lower their taxes. It will go from 11% in 2015 to 9% in 2019. And as to the details on other measures such as income sprinkling, they'll be known before they come into effect. Well, I trust that the minister knows that the Speaker is above politics. The Honourable Member for Rimouski-Nejet-Témiscouata-Les-Basques. Mr. Speaker, the American decision to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel is imprudent and will compromise not only the rights of Palestinians but also the hopes for peace in the region. This shows complete contempt for international rights and international law and has provoked confrontations in the West Bank and Gaza. France, Germany, and Italy are among the many countries who have expressed their disagreement. On the Canadian side, radio silence. Will the government join the international community and express its disagreement with this thoughtless decision? The Honourable Minister of Canadian Heritage. Mr. Speaker, Canada is a friend and ally of Israel. We believe that the status of Jerusalem can only be resolved in a larger negotiations. Now, we are committed to help achieve a lasting peace in the Middle East, and we want to see the peoples there to be working side by side for peace and prosperity. The Honourable Member for Laurier-Sainte-Marie.
Trump's decision yesterday was swift around the world, from the UN to the EU to France and Sweden, to name just a few. And the condemnations continues to mount. But Canada issued a spineless response that did not even refer to Trump's decision, a decision that will further undermine peace efforts. Is this really the kind of leadership that Canada wants to show on the world stage?
Minister of Canadian Heritage.
Mr. Speaker, Canada is very proud of its leadership on the world stage, and Canada is a steadfast ally and friend of Israel and a friend of the Palestinian people. Canada's long-standing position is that the status of Jerusalem can be resolved only as part of a general settlement of the Palestinian-Israeli dispute. This has been the policy of consecutive governments, may they be conservatives or liberals. We are strongly committed to the goal of a comprehensive, just, and lasting peace in the Middle East, including the creation of a Palestinian state living side by side in peace and security with Israel. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Dauphin, Swan River, and Neepawa will come to order. I'm sure that the opportunities to express opinions from all sides on issues like this, members should wait until they have the floor to do so. The
Honourable Member for Rimouski-Nejet-Témiscouata-Les-Basques. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to get back to the Auditor General's blistering report on the CRA. We learned that half of the Canadians who call the CRA don't get through, and when they do get through, 30% of the time the answers are wrong. The CRA is showing its complete incompetence. When will the Minister assume her responsibilities and demand that the CRA be accountable to taxpayers? The Honourable Minister of National Revenue. When I saw the AG's report, I agreed with all its recommendations. We have put $50 million into the agency's call centres. We've begun hiring more people. We have an action plan for our telephone service, improvement in information, and also more service numbers. The Honourable Member.
From the CRA, dating from 2014 showed that before the election, 25% of Canadians received bad advice when they contacted the CRA. Now the Auditor General tells us that it's 30% under this minister's watch, despite spending $50 million to answer the problem. The CRA has shown time and time again that it's more interested in protecting itself than the taxpayer. This needs to change. But as it stands now, I have to ask, because I really cannot tell, is the minister controlling the CRA or is the CRA controlling the minister?
The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, as I just said, I looked at the report, and I agree with all his recommendations. We have put $50 million in call centers, which were neglected for more than 20 years, Mr. Speaker. And we've hired more people. We have an action plan in place, and we want a telephone platform that will be capable of answering more people and of meeting the needs of our clientele. And we're giving training to people who work in these centers and more service numbers.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Finance Minister, I wonder if he's become an expert in hiding information and avoiding answering Canadians' questions. He's hidden his shares in a numbered company, and he hid the sale of some of his, or rather, he hid the date of the sale of some of his shares. We want him to answer some very simple questions. I'd like to know if we can have some sort of press release in order to know when he'll be resigning. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Finance Minister, above all, has helped to grow our economy in a remarkable way. So there will be no resignation of the Finance Minister. He is helping small businesses, lowering their taxes, stimulating the economy, creating 600,000 jobs, which is far better than anything they did, far better than their record. And the member for Beauce should know this. The Honourable Member for Beauce. Mr. Speaker, the Finance Minister's record is a real problem. He said we'd have a little deficit, and look where we are now. Mr. Speaker, he is indebting future generations. We were supposed to have a balanced budget, no balanced budget. So we're going to have deficit of more than $100 billion. Who's going to pay for it? Our children, our grandchildren. When will the Finance Minister resign? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank my colleague, the member for Beauce. Thank you for his question, because this will allow us to say that our debt-to-deficit ratio has much improved, better than it was in the 70s. It's been the best tax and fiscal position in the G7. Christine Lagarde of the IMF said that our actions should be emulated because of how well we've done. We're doing the right thing, meeting infrastructure needs. It's helping our economy and our workers. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Finance has become an expert at avoiding giving answers to Canadians. He hid his shares in a numbered company. He hid the date of the sale of some of those shares.
Shame.
Today, new documents show that the Minister is continuing his practice of hiding information from Canadians. When asked simply if the Minister signed the memorandum approving Bill C-27, he refused to answer. If the Minister refuses to be transparent about something as simple as this, will he just resign?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, the Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And no, the Finance Minister will not resign, because the Finance Minister has delivered more for the Canadian economy and for Canadians than they ever could in 10 years. We're talking about close to 600,000 jobs created, most of them full-time in the last 2 years. We're talking about the fastest growth in the G7. We're talking about a reduction in child poverty in Canada by 40%. We're talking about 1 million seniors who've seen their revenues go up with the guaranteed income supplement. That's the Finance Minister's work. That's this government's work. So no, Mr. Speaker, the Finance Minister will not resign.
Honourable Member for Carleton Trail, Eagle Creek.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Finance has not answered any of the reasonable and fair questions that we have asked regarding his conduct. What we've discovered is that the Minister was actively managing shares in Morneau Chapelle while he was promoting Bill C-27, which directly benefits his family business. So why won't the Minister answer this simple question? Was he the one who signed the memo to approve Bill C-27?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And to answer the member's question, I believe that constitutes cabinet confidence. But on another note, though, Mr. Speaker, I will tell you that the Finance Minister over the last 2 years has done amazingly well at growing this economy, and we are very proud of the work that he's done to make sure that Canada is prosperous and that this prosperity is good for everyone and benefits to all. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Carleton.
Well, if the finance minister will not resign, hopefully he will stand and answer the question I'm about to ask him personally. Last summer, he launched a direct attack on small businesses. He ruined the ability of farmers to be in their fields, for tourism operators to serve their customers, and for the others to enjoy a small break during that time. Now he's doing the same thing right before Christmas. He said he would have legislative proposals on his small business tax increase in fall. So if that's true, when will we see the bill?
Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With regards to income strengthening, and the Minister of Fisheries has been clear, the details will come forward shortly before the January 1st implementation date. Our goal has always been to bring more fairness to our tax system. We don't think it's fair that an individual, a wealthy Canadian, can institute a private corporation to save the equivalent of the average income per year. We think that we have to have a fiscal system that's fair, and that's fair for all Canadians. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member for Carleton.
Well, I understand that to mean there won't actually be a bill before the measures take effect. So our small family businesses will be forced to follow laws that don't even exist. How does this government expect anyone to run a business with rules that are written nowhere other than in a press release released the night before Christmas?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, I can reassure the member that the details will be known very shortly. And I want to remind also the member that we've lowered the small business tax rate from 11% to 9% by 2019 because we will always support small businesses. We will always stand behind small businesses. And, Mr. Speaker, I can reassure the member that our intention has always been that the family business model can continue to prosper, and we'll make sure that family members who work in a business can continue to do so and be remunerated for it. That's not the issue here, Mr. Speaker.
Right, I have to remind the member for Cypress Hills Grasslands, the member for Brandon Souris, that the nature of the debate is that one side gets to talk and the other side gets to talk, and only when we have the floor should we be speaking in the House. The honourable member for London Fanshawe.
Mr. Speaker, for weeks now, the Revenue Minister has repeated over and over again that the CRA under the Liberal government has recovered $25 billion in tax evasion. Except nobody knows where it comes from, and the Minister isn't able to explain that to anyone. And her own department doesn't know where this information comes from. You know, there's a difference between money identified and money recovered. How can Canadians believe the Minister when her own administration doesn't know what she's talking about?
The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, our government is fully committed to fighting tax avoidance and tax evasion. We have very effective measures to recover funds, and we've recovered close to $1 billion. We have the instruments necessary to fight tax cheats. We're on the right path to recovering even greater amounts of money. All companies and all persons will be subject to audits, and we will do what's necessary. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member for Sherbrooke. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At the Finance Committee, the Minister of Revenue said that all taxpayers' files were confidential and that they would remain so, and that no parliamentarian would have access to these files. And yet the Prime Minister, a parliamentarian himself, said we got guarantees, and this is from Mr. Bronfman, we got guarantees that everything was in according to the rules, and we were satisfied with the guarantees and this declaration. When will the Minister say that the Prime Minister had access to these files, and when will he face the consequences? Mr. Speaker, as my colleague knows full well, I will not comment on a particular case, neither today nor tomorrow, never, Mr. Speaker. The law prohibits this. But I'd like to assure my colleague that no one interferes with the CRA, and as long as I am Minister of Revenue, it will never happen. Let's be clear, no one is above the law, Mr. Speaker.
Saskatoon Grasswood.
Mr. Speaker, the Finance Minister's ethical challenges are very concerning. He is currently under investigation by the Ethics Commissioner for introducing legislation which could benefit his family corporation. He's already been fined for failing to disclose his offshore corporation, and the minister refuses to come clean about the contents of his other numbered companies. So how many ethics investigations will it take, Mr. Speaker, before this minister just does the right thing and resigns?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Finance Minister, as is expected from all ministers, all parliamentarians, has worked with the Ethics Commissioner. We have the utmost trust in the Ethics Commissioner to set the path forward for parliamentarians, which he has done with the Minister of Finance. When he got to Ottawa, followed all the recommendations. He has announced a few weeks ago that he would go above and beyond to dispose of all of his shares in Morneau Chapelle, place all his assets in a blind trust so that he can continue the work that he's been doing for 2 years for Canadians. Thank you.
L'honorable député de Beauport.
The Honourable Member for Beauport-Côte-de-Beaupré. Mr. Speaker, the Finance Minister's lack of ethics is becoming an embarrassment for the government. The person who is responsible for the country's budget is getting mired in a multitude of problems. He refuses to explain why he sold some shares and then shortly before introducing new tax measures. He's being investigated by the Ethics Commissioner for having introduced a bill that would benefit his family company. So, given all this, will the Finance Minister do the right thing and simply resign? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The tax measures she has alluded to are measures that we are very proud of. We've lowered lowered taxes from 11% to 9%. I think on this side of the House, we believe that there will be greater tax equity. We're lowering taxes for the middle class. It was a good thing that we introduced, and it is a good thing that we're doing.
Brock.
Mr. Speaker, the Finance Minister says he's done nothing wrong, but he continues to deflect and dodge questions. The Ethics Commissioner is looking into the sale of shares in his family's company just days before tax changes he imposed devalued those shares. He's been fined for hiding his offshore company. He's hid the fact that he was sheltering and controlling millions of shares in a numbered Alberta company. If he's done nothing wrong, why is it the minister refuses to answer simple questions about his behavior?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Finance Minister has worked with the Ethics Commissioner, has answered all our questions, will always work with the Ethics Commissioner to make sure that all rules are followed and so that he can continue the important work that he's been doing for the last 2 years, which has been to grow this economy at twice the growth that they were able to achieve in the 10 years that they were in power, creating more jobs than they ever could in their time in office. That's what the Finance Minister has been doing for the last 2 years, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for St. Albert, Edmonton.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Finance misled Canadians that his assets were in a blind trust when they weren't. He hid from the Ethics Commissioner an offshore company. He is under investigation as we speak. And to top it off, he refuses to disclose assets in multiple numbered companies. With a record like that, there is only one thing left for the minister to do, and that is resign. Why won't he?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think it's becoming quite obvious that the opposition want to talk about anything else but the economy, because when we talk about the economy and this government's record, it makes theirs pale in comparison, because over 10 years while they were in government, they had the lowest employment, the lowest growth that we've had since the Second World War. They had unemployment that was high as opposed to what we've achieved, lowest unemployment in the last 10 years. That's why, Mr. Speaker, they keep focusing and playing politics while we work for Canadians, and we'll continue to work for Canadians.
Honourable Member for Windsor-Tecumseh.
Mr. Speaker, the minister keeps saying she would like to reassure all Canadians who receive the disability tax credit that the eligibility criteria have not changed. Yet, a memo from her office says, quote, "This is to inform you of updates to the current LST procedures and verses relating to adults with diabetes." This means the eligibility criteria have indeed changed. Why does she continue to insult Canadians by insisting updated procedures means procedures haven't changed?
The Honourable Minister of National Revenue. Mr. Speaker, I want to reassure all Canadians who receive the disability tax credit that the eligibility criteria have not changed. That being said, I'm always willing to listen to the concerns of Canadians from all walks of life. If changes must be made to the agency's process, we will discuss them with the experts who will participate on the committee that I will be announcing tomorrow. We will do that out of fairness to all recipients of the disability tax credit, regardless of their disability, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member for Rosemont-la-Petite-Patrie. Mr. Speaker, I'm going to tell you a story. Once upon a time, there was a Minister of Revenue. She had a wonderful treasure worth $25 billion. But unfortunately, the minister had a great deal of imagination, and the treasure only existed in her head. Just like her obsession with believing that her department hadn't changed the rules for people with diabetes. It would be funny if this were a children's story, but people are suffering. It's not. Could the minister please come back down to earth?
Yes,
The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, our government is dedicated to fighting tax evasion and aggressive tax avoidance. We have invested significant funds to deal with that. We have imposed $44 million in penalties last year, and many investigations are underway. The agency has a unit that focuses on avoidance abroad and deals with funds in and out of Canada. In the past 2 years, the agency has received data on some $28 million in transfers.
Northwest Territories.
Monsieur le Président,
Mr. Speaker, the Arctic is one of Canada's greatest treasures. As the MP for Northwest Territories, I know how precious our coastlines, oceans, fisheries are to residents of the North and to all Canadians.
systems, we have a responsibility to protect them now more than ever. Can the Minister of Fisheries, Oceans and Canadian Coast Guard please update this House on what the government is doing to protect the high seas of the Central Arctic Ocean?
Honourable Minister.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je remercie.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank the member for Northwest Territories for his question.
A historic agreement in principle with our international partners to prevent unregulated commercial fishing in the high seas of the Central Arctic Ocean. This is the first time an international agreement of this magnitude has been reached before any commercial fishing takes place on a region of the high seas. We've taken a strong, proactive, precautionary approach to potential fishing activities in the Central Arctic Ocean, and we'll continue to work with our international partners, Mr. Speaker, Indigenous groups and Northerners to protect the Arctic Ocean.
Honourable Member for Lethbridge.
Jennifer McRae is a young mom who was denied benefits while on maternity leave. Recently, she reached out to her local MP, the Minister of Sport and Persons with Disability, in order to seek his help. In the 2-minute meeting that the minister was willing to offer her, Ms. McRae asked him why Ottawa is continuing to fight sick women, and he replied, "Well, Ms. McRae, that is the old question, like asking, when did you stop beating your wife?" Can the minister explain to Canadians what was meant by this statement?
Honourable Minister.
Our government is committed to improving the lives of all Canadians. I recognize that when speaking to people, I tend to be straightforward. However, I regret my comments as I know they were brash and inappropriate, and I apologize. I remember the conversation with Ms. McRae. It was a difficult conversation, and that is no excuse. I will take this opportunity to better myself as both an individual and as a parliamentarian.
Member from Lethbridge.
Mr. Speaker, there's straightforward and then there's altogether inappropriate.
Yes.
Now, we're starting to see a very disturbing pattern emerge here, and that is this. On Tuesday, it was thalidomide survivors, and then now it's new mothers. The minister released a public statement blaming this young mom for his inappropriate actions. Now, for a feminist government that claims men must take responsibility for their actions against women, how does the minister justify blaming this young mom for his condescending words? Isn't this victim blaming at its finest?
Yes, sir.
Minister of Sports and Persons with Disabilities. I recognize 100% that my comments were inappropriate, and I apologize profusely for them. I will continue to work on both my individual self as trying to improve as well as a parliamentarian. I know I'll continue to work as hard as I can for my constituents, and I know I will learn from this and move forward and better myself.
The Honourable Member for Mégantic-Lérade. The comments were inappropriate, but they thought him, Mr. Speaker. Now, this government claims to be helping the most vulnerable, but it's the contrary. On the one hand, the Minister of Revenue was caught red-handed taking money from people with diabetes by denying them a credit. And then we've got the Minister of Sport being condescending to women, and I don't even, to a mother, in fact, and I don't even dare repeat those colleagues in this place. One minister's out to get vulnerable people. Who's going to, in fact, restore dignity and order here? Who's going to help the vulnerable people? I invite my colleague to repeat the same thing outside of this House following question period. I invite him to come and say that I had no respect for my spouse who had diabetes and who I helped before he died. I invite him to question the work I did as a social worker. I am far from insensitive to the needs of people with diabetes. My role as minister is to make decisions that are fair for all, Mr. Speaker.
Order. Order. The Honourable Member for Surrey, Moose Mountain.
Mr. Speaker, vulnerable Canadians deserve better. We have ministers going out of their way to attack those who truly need help. The Revenue Minister is targeting single moms and denying legitimate benefits. And the Minister for Persons with Disabilities is refusing to help. And worse yet, belittling those who dare ask. Does the Minister understand that Canadians who reach out for him for help don't expect to be attacked for simply asking for it?
Honourable Minister of Sport and Persons with Disabilities.
Mr. Speaker, as a parliamentarian, I know my job is to meet with constituents and stakeholders across this country and work as hard as I can to represent their issues. I try to represent their interests in a real and fair match, and I know that I'm going to work hard to improve both myself as an individual and as a parliamentarian to continue to try and address their concerns. I know I am taking this very, very seriously, Mr. Speaker.
For Port Moody Coquitlam.
Mr. Speaker, Steelhead are in trouble. Specifically, Thompson and Chilcotin runs are in dire straits. Fisheries and conservation groups in British Columbia have called on this government to issue an emergency listing order under SARA and to investigate impacts of bycatch on steelhead runs. Those calls have largely gone unanswered. It's well past time this government listens to experts, so I ask, will the minister work with the British Columbia government to protect steelhead before it's too late?
Honourable Minister of Fisheries.
Mr. Speaker, I thank my colleague for the question. We share his concern with respect to steelhead salmon. I've had an opportunity on a number of occasions to discuss that with the government of British Columbia. We are working on a comprehensive approach that includes, obviously, a reliance on science, on traditional knowledge, on working with partners, on habitat protection, on coastal restoration. That's why we've invested record amounts of money in this, and we don't think that the job is done yet, and we'll continue to do what we need to do to protect those iconic species.
Honourable Member for Edmonton Strathcona.
Mr. Speaker, yet another iconic Canadian species, sockeye salmon, is now threatened. While we appreciate this government's response to the NDP's call for a deadline to list a species at risk, they continue to fail in their duty to protect critical habitat. Many of these species are relied on by Indigenous communities and other communities for their survival. Will even more court actions be needed to trigger government action on its duty to protect threatened species?
Honourable Minister of Fisheries.
Mr. Speaker, our government obviously is committed to protecting all species at risk, including Pacific salmon. We have worked with Environment and Climate Change Canada and the province of British Columbia to implement something I know very important to my colleagues from British Columbia. 64 of the 75 recommendations of the Cohen Commission. We'll continue, Mr. Speaker, to work diligently in that regard, and we'll continue to make the investments in habitat protection, in science, in enforcement. We're going to restore loss protections in the Fisheries Act as we committed to Canadians. We'll get the job done and we'll ensure that those iconic species are protected.
Honorable député de Charles.
The Honourable Member for Charlebourg-Haute-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Public Safety contradicted the Prime Minister when he said that it was unlikely for ISIL terrorists can be rehabilitated. Even though he doesn't think that they can be rehabilitated, the Liberals are spending money on poetry and podcasts, and that's ridiculous, Mr. Speaker. Why don't Liberals earmark funding for resources to protect Canadians against these terrorists instead?
Safety.
Mr. Speaker, the government obviously allocates significant budgets for the defence and safety and protection of Canadians. Unlike the previous government, that cut $530 million from the RCMP, $390 million cut from the CBSA, $69 million cut from CSIS, $42 million cut from the CSE, and $71 million cut from CATSA. It's the previous government that underfunded the financing of Canada's security systems.
Honourable Member for Renfrew, Nipissing, Pembroke.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Public Safety has admitted publicly that his government cannot rehabilitate hardened ISIS terrorists. Yet they're still spending millions of dollars trying to rehabilitate them using poetry and podcasts. Why aren't they using this money to protect Canadians against ISIS terrorists when they know their strategy has no hope of working?
Honourable Minister of Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, obviously the people opposite cannot explain the $1.2 billion that they cut from the security services of Canada. On the other hand, Mr. Speaker, our government uses a variety of tools to combat terrorism, including the Global Coalition Against Daesh, security investigation, surveillance, monitoring, intelligence gathering, lawful sharing, collection of evidence, criminal charges, criminal prosecutions, peace bonds, public listings, no-fly lists, hoisting of passports, authorized threat reduction measures, and preventative initiatives to head off tragedies in advance wherever that is possible. It's a balanced approach, Mr. Speaker, that works relying on our security.
The Honourable Member for Durham.
Mr. Speaker, the Liberals appear to be giving up on NAFTA. In China, the Prime Minister suggests that he'll work on a Canada-US deal if NAFTA is cancelled. Back home, Canada's chief negotiator suggests that Canada and Mexico will move ahead alone if the US withdraws. The Liberal government appears to be making this up as they go along, Mr. Speaker. Will the Foreign Minister rise in this House today and tell us why the Prime Minister is contradicting her chief negotiator?
Good question.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary for Canada-US Relations.
Mr. Speaker, our negotiating position is clear and always has been. We will defend the elements of NAFTA that Canadians know are essential to our national interest. We are negotiating in good faith, Mr. Speaker, and we expect our partners to do the same. A winner-take-all attitude is not conducive to the actual results that we all seek in terms of a win-win-win. Mr. Speaker, we cannot and will not accept proposals that put Canadian jobs at risk and do harm to our economy. We will always defend Canada's national interests and stand up for our values. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member for Niagara Centre.
Mr. Speaker, our government is making historic infrastructure investments in communities across the country through the 12-year, $186 billion infrastructure plan. We are working with our partners to move their priorities forward and challenging them to be innovative in both the projects they put forward and how they think about community improvement planning, resulting in community building. Can the Minister of Infrastructure and Communities please update this House on the government's latest challenge to Canadian communities?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the Honourable Member for Niagara Centre for his question. I recently launched the Smart Cities Challenge in Calgary, encouraging communities to work together, improve the lives of the residents through innovation, data, and connected technologies. We're encouraging our partners to be bold and innovative and participate in Smart Cities Challenge in order to build stronger, more sustainable, and inclusive communities to create jobs and more thriving economy. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Great. The honourable member for Caribou, Prince George.
Mr. Speaker, this morning the U.S. International Trade Commission unanimously voted against the Canadian lumber industry because of this government's inaction and failure to get a deal done, despite repeatedly assuring this House and Canadians that they were getting the job done. Canadian industry is being held ransom and are facing a lengthy and costly legal battle. Job losses and layoffs are going to be seen. What does this minister have to say to those hardworking forestry families that are now facing even a more uncertain future 2 weeks from the Christmas break?
Parliamentary Secretary for Canada-U.S. Relations.
Mr. Speaker, the duties imposed by the U.S. Department of Commerce and the International Trade Tribunal are unwanted, unfair, and deeply troubling. We recently challenged the countervailing duties under NAFTA's Chapter 19, and 2 days ago we initiated legal action under the World Trade Organization. Our forestry industry has succeeded in every such previous dispute, as has Canada, and we will continue to fiercely defend our softwood lumber industry and its incredible workers. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Longueuil-Saint-Hubert. Mr. Speaker, the Netflix deal is dead and buried in the eyes of Quebecers. It's done. Everyone, people from the cultural sector, the National Assembly, the public, everyone rejects the fiscal inequity afforded to these web giants. In fact, 72% of Quebecers find the Netflix agreement unfair. 89% think it can no longer remain secret. The Minister of Heritage will be making a big speech tomorrow in Montreal. All eyes will be on her. Everyone expects her to fix the situation. Will the Minister of Heritage and Minister of Finance accept that they make a mistake and to back down on this unfair situation? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, our colleague refuses to talk about creation and our new cultural policy because they know that it corresponds precisely to our election commitments, which were much more ambitious than theirs. They know that we're investing billions more in culture than they could never have done. Mr. Speaker, the NDP lost its credibility when it comes to investments in culture. What's more, last week they lost credibility with respect to defense of the French language in the Supreme Court.
For Don Valley West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Rosalie is a caregiver living, working, and helping in Don Valley West. In 2014, needing surgery, she applied for permanent residency, which would have allowed her to have her family come here to help her. She's still waiting. In 2012, Marianne applied for her PR, asking for my help in 2016. She's still waiting. Too many live-in caregivers are waiting far too long for their families while they care for ours. Could the Minister of Immigration tell the House what he's doing to reunite caregivers with their families?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the honourable member for Don Valley West for his question.
Reunification. And we also value the important services that caregivers provide to Canadians. But for far too long, these people have been waiting to reunite with their own families. Under the mismanagement of the immigration system by the Conservatives, caregivers have been facing wait times of between 4 to 5 years. Our government will eliminate the caregiver backlog by the end of 2018, and we will establish a new processing time of only 12 months. For new applications. We believe in doing the right thing, and unlike the rhetoric from the other side, we have taken action. We've put resources in place and put the right people in place to eliminate this backlog, because at the end of the day, this is about people.
Order. The honourable member for Bellechasse, Les Echemins, Lévis. Mr. Speaker, the Liberal defence policy stipulates that the Royal Canadian Marine must have task groups with 4 support ships. It's page 35. But the problem is that since we lost the Preserver and the Protector, there are no ships that can fulfill those duties. The Asterix is underway, but where's Obelix? We did what was necessary for Asterix. What's the government waiting for to grant the Obelix contract before Christmas? Our national security depends on this.
Secretary Parlementaire au Ministre des Défense.
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Our government is acquiring 2 joint support ships to permanently replace the resupply ships in the protector category, to equip our Navy and to ensure that they can carry out their missions. These 2 vessels will provide resupply, transport, and support for land operations. The government has committed to building new vessels to maintain naval capabilities in the long term, and the contracts have been granted to the shipyards in Vancouver, and we are looking...
Député de Montcalm.
Well, member from Montcalm. Mr. Speaker, in December 2016, the Deputy Leader for the Conservatives, Ms. Ambrose, asked the Ethics Commissioner to conduct an investigation on dinner with the Prime Minister and Chinese billionaires. The question is simple. In the documents passed on to the Ethics Commissioner, was there a list of Vancouver donors, the ones who contributed $70,000 to the Papineau riding last July?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. These assertions are entirely false, as confirmed by the Conflict of Interest Commissioner. Not only that, but the Liberal Party has moved forward with the strongest standards in federal politics for openness and transparency, including facilitating media coverage, advanced postings, posting in public accessible spaces, and timely reporting of event details and guest lists. Contrast that, Mr. Speaker, to opposition parties who continue to organize their fundraising events in secret, barring journalists and hiding details about who's attending their closed-door events.
The Honourable Member for Montcalm. Mr. Speaker, the Ethics Commissioner is investigating privileged access to the Prime Minister by Chinese billionaires, including the founder of a bank in Vancouver. The day when the bank received its charter, Papineau got $70,000, and I'm supposed to be satisfied with an answer like that? People deserve transparency and an answer. They deserve an answer, Mr. Speaker. Did the Prime Minister submit the list of donors from Vancouver to the Ethics Commissioner? It's not a trick question, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, all I can do is just reaffirm and reinforce that these assertions are entirely false, as confirmed by the Conflict of Interest Commissioner. Not only that, but the Liberal Party has indeed moved forward with strongest standards in federal politics for openness and transparency, including facilitating media coverage, advanced posting in public accessible spaces, and timely reporting of event details and guest lists. Mr. Speaker, it is open and it is transparent. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Louis Saint Laurent on a point of order.
Rising on a point of order. During question period, the Parliamentary Secretary, the Minister of Finance, talked about the government's tax policy. In order to tell the truth to Canadians for the 7th time, I ask to table the following document: the Department of Finance Canada Annual Financial Report. Apparently, there is not unanimous consent of the House, which is evident. I thank the Honourable Member from Louis Saint Laurent.
We better wait a moment, I think. Order. I'd ask honourable colleagues to take their conversations into the hallways, and I would ask members to assist me by saying shh. Thank colleagues for their cooperation, and now we will